Okay. Hi, everybody. What I'm going to talk about is perfectionism. Now, it turns out that perfectionism is a really strong predictor of whether your pain is going to become chronic or not, which is absolutely fascinating. The correlation between the two is really, really close. So if you have a perfectionist tendency, and you have and you have pain, this will definitely make your pain harder to get rid of, harder to manage. And therefore, recognizing that in yourself turns out to be incredibly important. In fact, in big studies, more important than actually having, say, treatment of your back or something like that done. It turns out, as a long-term option, learning how to manage your perfectionism could be the most important thing that you do to make your life better. So let's explore perfectionism. It's a really fascinating character trait. Often it will come on, the first inklings of this trait will come on when you're a small child. And what will happen is some terribly important person. So it could be a parent, it could be an older sibling, it could be someone that you think is all-knowing. And that person says to you, gosh, and I use your name, so it's me, gosh, Jonathan, well done. You're such a clever boy. I'm so pleased that you did whatever it was. Now, as a child, you have two choices. And the first is you can think, wow, well, I did the job well. That's great. And that's nice. The second, which turns out to be really, really pivotal in your life, is that you think, oh, the only way that I can be a good boy or good girl is to do the job well. So this little twist turns out to be utterly massive in your life, because now the way you do a job is how you measure your self-worth. Am I a good person? Well, I am if I have done the job well. With this pivotal change, you now will measure your self-worth by how good a job you do. And this turns out to be incredibly powerful for the rest of your life. So for most people, the way that you measure your self-worth has sort of multifaceted. You know, if you're kind, if you're doing something you love doing, and for most people, good enough is okay. It's okay. But for people who measure how good you feel about yourself by doing an absolutely wonderful job, the better the job, the better person you are, what happens is that you have created a slave driver inside your head. And now what the slave driver says, so you are very task oriented. You are the kind of person that people love to have working for them or working with them. You're the kind of friend who will always organize things to perfection. And here's the crunch, you'll do the job, not 100%, but 130% or 150%. That everybody around you will be utterly delighted. But the real crunch is that you won't. Because the little slave driver in your head said, that wasn't quite good enough. You could do better. And so, as a perfectionist, you have a slave driver inside your head, always pushing you to do that little bit better than is humanly possible. And what this does is it creates a long-lasting tension inside you, because deep down, because you've set the bar so high, so impossibly high, deep down, you know that you're just not quite good enough. And the weird thing is that this is something you don't know it until you start to recognize it, but this is something of your own making. So perfectionists tend to be kind of black and white people. It is good enough or it's not. And for you, it's often just not. You tend to be very, very task oriented, and which is, of course, how you measure everybody else and how you measure in particular yourself. And what this does, as I said, is this: having the slave driver inside you creates increased tension constantly, because you're living with this person inside your head who is saying, you're just not good enough, just not quite, never quite getting there. Now you injure yourself, and you injure yourself doing something. So often the first thing that will happen is the slave driver will blame. You'll blame yourself. Why was I so stupid? Why couldn't I have foreseen that whatever it was that was going to injure me? So that's the first thing. You blame yourself. The second is that when you start to seek for for what is actually wrong and how to get better, the slave driver is there, always in the background. If the physiotherapist you're seeing says, do so many, walk such a distance, or do so many push-ups, or do your stretch this way, you will focus amazing. You'll be the perfect patient, but in your own mind, you'll always push it a wee bit further, and you will never quite be good enough, because the slave driver always sets the bar higher than is humanly possible. And so you will drive yourself, and you'll think, well, said I should do, half an hour of walking, I will make it 45 minutes. And so you'll push yourself, then you'll hurt yourself. You think, why am I such a fool? And you can see having a slave driver inside you is constantly sabotaging your ability to heal. And the thing also is that the slave driver will often, you judge yourself, but you will also judge others. So you may find that the person who's helping you also isn't quite good enough. And it spreads. So perfectionism, when it's good, perfectionism is great. It says, I'm going to try my very best to do my very best. That's a wee bit of perfectionism. And whatever I produce will be the best I do, and that's great. But when that little voice gets out of control, then you end up with a scenario that I have painted. And often, because it's tucked away so deep in your subconscious, you don't actually recognize it for what it is. So the first task for everybody who's listening to this is to sit here and think, could that be me? Could I be a perfectionist? Everyone else is delighted with me. I am hardly ever delighted with myself. I have chronic pain, and wow, who would have thought that my perfectionism would be, in fact, one of the main drivers stopping me getting better. if you tick all those little boxes, then this is great, because now you know something that you've never quite recognized before. And now you can start to take some steps. You can recognize the behaviors that this perfectionist trait is driving, and you can start to take some steps to change what's been happening inside you for all these years. So step number one, recognize and acknowledge, yes, I'm a perfectionist, and yes, it isn't the greatest thing for me. In fact, it is a self-destructive thing going on inside me. You're not alone. We've all got good things that we do and self-destructive things, and this is yours. Okay, that's cool. So now you recognize that. Okay. Number two, start to recognize the little voice in your head that is your slave driver. Start to listen to it. So in other words, you do a job, everyone else says, that's great. And you find something inside you says, no, not quite good enough. You could have done this, you could have done that, you could have done this. As that little voice comes up, recognize it and think, aha, that is my perfectionist slave driver voice. You can do it, say, for a week. That voice will come up every single day. Once you absolutely start to recognize it, then you do something which is actually really, really powerful. You give your slave driver perfectionist voice a name. You call it Fred, Martha, or you could call it something which I'm not allowed to say. You can choose whatever you like. You can give it a horrible name, or you can just give it a name. It doesn't matter, because by doing this, you are separating that voice out. You're saying, aha, it's like there's a secret covert operation going on inside you, and now you just shine a light on it and you say, aha, okay, I recognize you, I can hear you. Okay, because the first thing is know thine enemy. And if thine enemy is inside you, that's more tricky, but you definitely can do it. So once you've done that, you've given this perfectionist voice a name, you now have a choice. And the choice is, as that little voice comes up, you've done the job, it's pretty good, everybody else is delighted, and that little voice comes up and says, no, you could have done this and that and the other. Whatever that voice says, you can say, pause a minute and say, do I have to listen to this? Is this helping me? Is it actually that I needed to do more, or is it just my perfectionist voice that's been slave driving in the background for my whole life? And you make that choice. You say, aha, do I have to listen to Fred? No, this is total nonsense. Look, everyone else is delighted. My boss is delighted. That's great. And then you speak to Fred, or whoever the voice is. You say to your perfectionist, actually, that's not helpful. So that kind of information I don't need. When the job really does, when I have done a bad job, you can talk to me. But otherwise, I'm not actually accepting you at this stage. So that you can do. Now, here's the interesting thing. For a number of people, or a proportion of people who have perfectionist traits, ignoring that voice, recognizing it for what it is, but ignoring the advice of that voice can trigger an emotion. And the emotion can be sometimes quite powerful. You get a feeling of, oh my God, I feel anxious. That's, oh, okay. Because that voice is such a big part of you. As, as you feel that anxiety, recognize it's just a reaction of your body. And as with all emotions, just quiet myself down, breathe a little bit, the emotion goes, and then you ask yourself, did the sky fall on my head? Have I died? Has the world come to? No, none of those things have happened. Ah, okay. So I ignored that voice. I actually spoke to that voice and said, butt out, not helpful, and I'm okay. Fantastic. So that's the first thing you do. Recognize the voice, give it a name, and choose whether you're going to listen to it or not. And recognize in the beginning, you may have quite a strong emotional reaction, which will rapidly become less as you start to organize who actually has the power here. The second thing you can do is that you can look at certain tasks in your day. I was speaking to a perfectionist lady just this morning who said what she did was she left some spelling errors in an email that she was going to send, because she'd normally go through and make it perfect. But this time she could see the errors because she typed the thing quickly. She went, oh, okay. And she pushed send and sent it with all the errors. She said immediately she had this reaction and she thought, nope, that's not important. The errors are very minor and it's okay. And having done that, she had that immediate reaction. And afterwards, she thought, yes, I did well. So you can leave certain jobs that normally you would utterly do. You leave them partially done, recognizing that it is also part of you managing the slave driver inside you. Now, it's been there a long time, so it's going to take a fair bit of work to learn how to manage the little voice. But as time goes on, that little perfectionist voice will happen less and less. It will be less strident. It will be less persnickety and difficult. And you will find your life improves out of sight. The other thing you will find is that as you start to feel better, your pain will start to reduce. So there you go. Perfectionism is not your friend, but you have all the tools to bring this part of your mind under perfect control. Thank you.